It's Real Talk, Episode 4, a Spike Lee joint, and I'm your host, Al the Movie Lion. On today's show, my pal Jimmy the Toucan flies in again to review She's Gotta Have It. Documentary producer Lara Benario helps me fight the power and score Do the Right Thing. Cinematographer as well as Professor Timothy Richardson and Nefarious Network founder Nate Milton separately grade the epic Malcolm X. Now quick, leave a like, subscribe, by any means necessary. Real Talk is powered by Real Digital. If you work for a brand or agency producing content, keep it real by setting up a consultation at www.realdigital.media to see how your next campaign can come in ahead of schedule and under budget. The now classic 1986 film She's Gotta Have It kicked off the legendary filmmaking career of writer-director Spike Lee, who is currently celebrating his fourth decade as an active filmmaker. This, his earliest work, may largely be void of color, but it's delightfully oversaturated with ideas, inspiration, and wonderful performances. Lee's work doesn't just have a pulse, it has a passionate, beating heart that is as authentic and honest as it is bold and experimental. It's rare to get a filmmaker who can balance theme, characters, and plot so harmoniously with a soundtrack and visuals, let alone a 31-year-old first-time director. The story orbits around Nola Darling, who in many ways might be a symbol for the affection the young filmmaker desires from his audience. Lee may even poke fun at this idea when his character Mars is dismissed for needing to grow up, a humble and humorous handling of the character considering he is being performed by the co-writer of the script. The distinct stylings and visual discussions this joint makes early in the story might make you think the camera is less a lens and more a vessel that transforms us, the audience, into a character in the film. But I would offer that the camera is more likely a mirror that allows our character to speak honestly into, because after all, She's Gotta Have It is a discussion. The film's title is the driving force behind the plot and successfully answers what the it is that she's gotta have. If Nola is indeed a symbol for the audience, then her journey to learn that she must love herself before she can truly love another seems like an appropriate thesis statement for a young filmmaker who never stopped pushing the envelope. Nola learns that her worth is immediately dictated by the handling of the relationships in her life, and so too Spike Lee proved his worth out of the gate by masterfully managing the relationships in this movie. So what does she have to have? The same thing we all do. A little more self-love, and boy did I love this movie. I'm very excited to welcome back our favorite film toucan, Jimmy, to help me score the picture. Jimmy!
Hello, Al. How
back.
you doing?
Episode 4, Spike Lee. She's gotta have it.
Have it. She's gotta have it. I've gotta have it. All right, Al. Having a good time. Having a great time.
I'm so glad to hear it. All movies have a plot. This movie's got a plot. What'd you think of it?
Look, I like this movie. I like the independent filmmaking spirit. I love the handmade quality. I love the black and white cinematography. I'm going to talk about that later. Ernest Dickerson. I think that there is a plot here. There's a sequence of events that occurs in this woman's life, and what she is faced with is what I think, and it shows that she has an inability to make a decision. She has an inability to make a decision because out of fear of making the wrong decision. And I think that is very relatable to everybody watching. I think oftentimes it comes off as wooden. I think it comes off sometimes as predictable and artificially sweet, saccharine. I gave this plot a 5.
Wow.
And,
Okay.
yes. And mainly because of those things that I just said.
Now, let me ask you, when you say that you felt the film was predictable, what aspects of it did you find predictable? Because I do feel like the plot is setting out to say, hey, let's take a trope, let's take something that we see in other films, and let's sort of traverse this a bit. I don't know that I necessarily saw the ending coming, or for that matter, any number of things. I'll point out I really enjoyed the sequence in particular where they all have Thanksgiving dinner together. I thought that was really funny. But like that's something I would have never seen coming. I didn't necessarily see her trying to bring all three men together. The way that all plays out. I don't know. I thought there was a really consistent sort of romance and whimsy to this plot that I definitely did not find predictable.
When we're presented with stories of romance and love and loss, there's going to be things that we know are going to happen as an audience, right? I think they're interesting. It's an interesting story construction where these male characters interweave within this woman's life. It is it is about a lot of things
Yeah.
uh, that are specifically feminine, and I think that's one of the main thrusts of this thing. I think there are moments of truth that ring out that are I think are important in contrast to the feminine position, or maybe in agreement with it. There is this need and desire for men to own their lovers, their property, their egos, their lifestyles. As a result, when men can't own the woman that they have, they wonder about that woman's other lovers and that woman's other life. I think that this movie celebrates those ideas in a very studenty kind of way, a student film kind
Sure.
of.
I mean, it is raw. Look, it's his first movie. He's 31 years old, or would have been about 30 when he made it, maybe 29. I want to again before I move on to the characters because it's I mean it's almost difficult to not talk about the plot and the characters simultaneously. I mean this is a character driven film. I mentioned in my opening this is very much a conversation, and I think the conversation is about what is monogamy, what is the virtue of it, what are the setbacks to it. There's a really beautiful colored sequence right in the middle of the film
Yes.
for Noel's birthday. Again, very unpredictable. You know, something that you wouldn't necessarily see coming.
I thought it was jarring. It's a dream sequence, right? It is bizarre. It is super colorful. It's because we're pulled out of this black and white world. It is a departure. It is a
Yeah.
departure from the story we were indulging in. It poses as a symbol for sexual liberation and freedom of choice, youth, open sexuality,
And I
right?
think infatuation. I think just
Yeah,
that
yeah.
feeling or in a relationship when you don't fully know the person yet, but you're kind of giving them all of yourself. We're talking about these characters, Jimmy. Obviously, they all orbit around Nola. She's the main character. How do you like Nola? I mean, in the pantheon of cinema heroines, where does she rank for you?
Being a woman in today's society or in yesterday's society or in society is tough. There are certainly identifiable sufferings that she undergoes. This celebration of femininity and sexuality, some of it I don't identify with. I found it really frustrating. I'd hate to date a woman like that. I had a hard time believing some of the wooden acting.
Yeah, no,
Um,
it has a very like almost a theater quality. It felt
yeah,
like I don't want to say community theater because that sounds like more of a knock than I mean it to. I'm trying to identify it more of a style. It felt like a theater group making a movie.
to me, it was unconvincing and wooden and oftentimes cringeworthy. I gave it a 6
Okay,
because of this consistent student acting quality.
sure,
Sometimes it's great. Sometimes I'm in. Most of the time, I'm not.
fair enough. There is a scene that I think is really important to mention where Nola is assaulted by her partner, and what I think is really interesting is not necessarily the way she handles it during the scene, but the way she acknowledges it after. She's very matter of fact in identifying that he assaulted her. And the way she sort of owns it and calls him out on it. I mean, it in one way you could argue that it sort of undermines the severity of the situation, but at the same time, it's so rare to see any character just acknowledge what happened and sort of not really allow the partner or the person she's talking to kind of escape from that. And he has to acknowledge it, and he has to sort of dignify it with an answer, and sort of apologize for it and explain that it was a low moment. So I don't know. I thought that was a really interesting choice. I think it's a choice that you'd really only see a young filmmaker make. I don't know, for a lot of different reasons, that a more mature filmmaker would probably not pull the trigger on making a decision to do something like that. But I thought it was really interesting, and again, something that I did not expect, and it made me really appreciate her character a lot more than maybe I did prior to it.
I agree with that.
Now we're talking about the visual storytelling. This is a movie that is black and white. But admit the soundtrack for this movie is jazz, and I think that that's really at the heart of the visual storytelling of this. I mean, if there was ever a visual representation of jazz, I think that She's Gotta Have It might be a really good example of that.
I think Ernest Dickerson, as the director of photography, really shines here. And the fingerprints on celluloid really shine. It is lush black and white photography. The photographs in the beginning
Oh, I
that
love it.
set the stage of Brooklyn. His indoor lighting has this
Oh,
wonderful grain to it. There's this like real like handmade quality to these shots, and but the lighting is really spectacular. This wonderful technicolor bizarre musical dance sequence really stands out, especially when it's like injected right into the middle of this thing.
yeah.
There are some really great moments, like great visual moments. Spike Lee chose to open up a scene just on a naked woman's breast. It was funny to me. There are some like funny moments.
Oh,
Uh,
there's this movie has a real sense of humor. I mean, this movie is sharp, if nothing
oh,
else.
I agree. I agree. Every time Spike Lee is on camera and
Uh,
performing, he's always hilarious.
I'm curious. I don't know how many people would make this connection. Maybe other people have. I see a lot of almost like a Charlie Chaplin in Spike Lee when he's on camera. He is this very, small figure, but there's just so much life and color that comes out of him, and he just commands every scene he's in, despite being, I don't know, a head and shoulder shorter than everyone else, but he has such an incredible presence, and in the way he introduces every character in this movie. I mean, yes, it has a film student kind of quality to it. I found that really charming, and again, it felt more experimental than it necessarily did student film esque to me, because I thought the quality was there. The way the camera moves a lot, it's very jerky, and it feels a little bit, you could argue that there's a student quality to it or a lack of polish, but I felt like it was really appropriate for what it was showcasing and doing. And
Yeah.
even when the movements feel a little uncontrolled, they still feel very focused in terms of what they're trying to do and what they're trying to accomplish. And so I felt like the cinematography really spoke to what the movie was doing, and kind of was very harmonized with the spirit of the film. What would you give it out of 10?
I agree with you. And so I think, again, that I give a lot of credit to again, the lush cinematography of New York City, Brooklyn as a backdrop. I gave it a 7.5.
I also think again, you mentioned the light in the movie. I think Nola's bedroom is just a really fun set. I think anybody who sees this movie would probably always remember that set. Just this really cool, loft with sort of a bed in the center, and this really cool sort of headboard with, probably 50 plus candles on it. The next category is use of sound.
Hmm.
What do you give the movie? If anybody ever is judging sound on a movie, Jimmy, your credibility goes a long way in this department. So what were your thoughts?
I appreciate that. There is some good jazz music and jazz ideology here. Dialogue track is a little crunchy and somewhat choppy. There's a scene where a guy is playing a piano It is not even an actual piano sound that is being presented. And there are some funny moments where sound is used. I laughed when there are these African uh, bongos happening during a sex scene, which was really great. There are these again in the opening romantic sexual scene. It is like candle lit and it's beautiful. And there's this great, she puts the music on, and then there are these like funny like animal noises that are like jungle animal noises.
Nola has various partners in the movie, and her experiences with the different partners, sexually and otherwise, all kind of have their own soundtrack and kind of have their own pace and their own rhythm. One of her other partners seems to take about 25 minutes to get undressed before he gets in bed, and there's just this almost crickets where there's just no sound and she's just waiting. And so yeah, it's what you're pointing out is absolutely true, but just as funny as when there's a lack of sound being used to articulate sort of the lack of passion with surprisingly, what many would argue is probably the much better looking partner, and certainly the partner who's presented as the best looking or most aesthetically inclined option she has.
Yeah. I'm a stickler for rubber lips. And that's when actors come back to re-record their dialogue
Mhm.
and try to match to what's happening in the scene. And there are a couple moments are quite cringeworthy. Lost a lot of points for with me on some of those, so I gave it a
The
six.
six. All right. Jimmy gives use of sound on She's Gotta Have It a six. Now we're in the last category, Jimmy. This is a
Mm-hmm.
category that really, budget, technical skills, they don't really touch this one. This is theme. What did you think of the theme?
So we open with text on screen from Zora Neale Hurston's Their Eyes Were Watching God. And part of the quote goes, women forget all those things they don't want to remember and remember everything they don't want to forget. The dream is the truth. And then we open into this beautiful, lovemaking scene when we are discussing femininity, youth, cultural and sexual liberation, freedom of choice, open sexuality. When we're discussing those things, it is quite profound. Now, I think thematically, I did point out that the bizarre musical dance sequence and that was color was in that it is for the theme of this story. It really matters. It really matters, um, in the sense that um, we we feel that there is a transgression. One of the things I think that is most profound about the theme that I really related to was this question: are we happy when we are faced with too many choices? And it got me thinking. There's a great book by a guy named Barry Schwartz, and it's called The Paradox of Choice: Why More is Less. He argues that while freedom of choice is generally seen as a positive thing, an abundance of options can actually lead to increased anxiety, dissatisfaction, and regret. He suggests that having too many choices can make it harder to make decisions, lower our expectations, and ultimately make us less happy. We see that happen with this character. Imagine we all do this when we go shopping on Amazon, when we go shopping to watch a movie on Netflix. Some people need to see every single thing on that platform before they make a decision. And it is that abundance of options that leads us to, again, this sense of dissatisfaction. So when Nola's led to like break up with everybody, it's clear that she can't decide because she has too many choices. Spike Lee, uh, his character responds when she's breaking up with him. He says breakups are always hard. What? Well, she's like, I don't love you. He said, well, what's love got to do with anything? But ultimately, this is a story about a need, want, and wish and desire for control. But all she's really after is the semblance of control.
What would you give it out of 10?
I gave it a 7.5.
7.5. Wow, okay. I will say when it comes to the theme, again, I felt very much like this was just a film about love and self-love and discovery and what I think a lot of young people do, especially in a place like New York, is they explore themselves through exploring other relationships, and there can be a real danger to that. There's all sorts of things that can happen, and some of those things do happen in this movie. And what makes her uh again your sort of classical heroes that she learns that she's not going to find anything, she's not going to find ultimately what she needs in these other relationships. That's something that she needs to find in herself. And you've mentioned
Yes.
a few times that there are really great handling of various love scenes in this movie and love making scenes, but her self-discovery and her discovery and love of herself is also symbolized in a sex scene. Just to review for the audience, you gave the plot a 5, you gave the characters and performances a 6, you gave the visual storytelling a 7.5, the use of sound a 6, and finally you gave the theme a 7.5. That gives you a total of 64.
I'm going to elevate it a little bit. I'm going to elevate it and I'm going to give it a C plus.
A C plus.
Based on our conversation, I agree with a lot of things that you're saying. I'd like to hear what you gave it.
So I for the plot, I gave it a 10. I felt like there wasn't really much more I wanted from this. Like I said, I personally didn't find it really predictable at all. I was always kind of experiencing it in real time and really enjoying it. I thought that the plot did a great job of sort of executing the theme. But the characters and performances, I gave a 9. Again, I felt like it was void of a real classic performance, but I thought everybody was really consistent. You mentioned that there's this sort of quality to it that you kind of held against it in terms of, the acting being a little wooden. I found that really, really charming. I felt like this if I went and saw a community play or a community if I went to a theater and saw a show at a college, I would expect a certain level from the performers, and I don't know, I didn't really expect more than what I was given, and I was really happy with what I was given. In terms of visual storytelling, I gave it an 8.5. I felt like again it was really fun. I mentioned, that I feel like it's kind of the visual equivalent of a jazz track, which I thought was really great. For a first-time filmmaker, I think you'd be hard pressed to get a much better picture. And for filmmakers that have produced, better looking pictures out of the gate, that's why they'd get more than an 8.5. I gave the use of sound an 8. Again, I felt like it was really appropriate and really well done. I note, as well as you do, there were some little technical hiccups, which is why I knocked it back. I mean, it isn't perfect, but it was really enjoyable. And in terms of the theme, I gave it a 10. I really did like, yeah, I felt like this movie was a great representation of what it's meant to be. Nola is exploring herself. She's exploring this situation and she's exploring what it is to be a young woman at that age. And the movie also explores those things, I think, really well. And as a man, as a male lion, I really felt like I was given a perspective that I didn't have previously. So for me
Yeah.
overall, I gave the movie a 91, which is an A. I feel like it's a very solid A. So yeah, you gave it a C plus. I
I
gave it.
gave it a C plus, and I after we've after we've been really talking about it, I do have a deeper appreciation because of the things that you've been saying. So it is it does have some positive qualities to it.
If you, the listener, appreciated this movie, maybe you liked it, maybe you hated it. If you hated it, I want to hear about that. Let me know in the comments. Jimmy, I'm gonna leave a like right now because of how much I appreciate you. I'm not gonna
Ooh.
I'm not gonna force you to do the same, but if you left a like right now for me, I wouldn't be upset. As always, buddy, I love you. I'm so glad you joined me. Will you come back? Will you watch another movie
Oh,
with us?
I'd love to watch another movie and talk to you about it, Al.
I can't wait, Jimmy. Until next time, my friend. Platinum Plastic isn't just a proud sponsor of Real Talk. They're also the home for all our new designs and merchandise. Follow Platinum Plastic on Redbubble by clicking the link in the description and see all our A-plus gear. That's Platinum Plastic on Redbubble for all your Real Talk merch. In 2015, 26 years after the film's release, the blocks between Stuyvesant and Lexington Ave on Quincy Street became the first New York City streets to be named after a piece of art, and has been known since as Do the Right Thing Way. In Spike Lee's first joint, She's Gotta Have It, the filmmaker tells a story in black and white, with a splash of color in the center of the film, used as a symbol for the passion between its main characters. Do the Right Thing seemingly uses that motif to open the picture with a brilliantly audacious thesis statement that sets a pace and tone without revealing anything about the story, which feels like a practice lost in contemporary filmmaking. Do the Right Thing wears its themes on its sleeves, but don't get too distracted by them because you might scuff someone's kicks, and on Stuyvesant Ave, that's definitely the wrong thing to do. In a movie about blacks and whites, no one is completely wrong and no one is completely right, but everyone is authentically and passionately layered. Giancarlo Esposito, Rosie Perez, Samuel Jackson, Bill Noon, and Ozzie Davis are just the names of the supporting players to Spike Lee, John Turturro, and Danny Aiello in this supremely well-performed story about community whose tensions are rising higher than the record-setting summer heat, which boils over in a way that feels like the cinematic equivalent of a great American play. One of my original production pals, former New Yorker and documentary producer Lara Benario, joins me in the jungle today to help me score this legendary film.
Lara, I hate to put you on the spot, but if you had a pizza shop, would you hang a photo of a lion in it?
Just your photo, Al.
All right, well, I'll take it, but if any lions are listening, don't be offended. I'm sure I'm sure we would be well represented. Thank you so much for coming today, for coming to the jungle.
Happy to be asked. I mean, you certainly picked a doozy of a film.
Well, look, this is a classic. This is a movie. It came out in '89. It gets into a lot of stuff. I don't know, Lara. What were your what were some of your your thoughts on the plot of Do the Right Thing? Just a nice softball to open up the conversation with.
It's very different from most films, and I think that's why the film got so much attention and was revolutionary for its time, for the year it came out, and it's even is now. It still is now. I think that was the craziest thing about rewatching this is I had seen it probably in college. I don't want to date myself, but many years ago. And rewatching it speaks to the brilliance of Spike Lee, that it's still feels so current and relevant, and also is quite sad. Just the simmering tensions happening throughout this one neighborhood, and the fact that it could so easily boil over at any moment, which is what tends to happen in real life. It's funny because I watched the movie with my partner, and he said the reason that the film escalates to the point that it does, spoiler alert, it ends in a huge race riot. He was like, the reason that they get into this fight, it's such a stupid reason. It's so dumb. It's like this guy comes into a pizza shop and he's playing his boombox too loud. And, that's the thing that sparks this huge fight. No, that's not it. Like, you missed the whole point. It's not. I feel like Spike Lee set the stage for you to feel as the viewer that anything at any time could have been the spark plug that ignited this huge fire.
It's an interesting way to frame it, because I looked at the movie and the plot is this sort of budding of two ideals. I mean, especially at the end of the movie, we get these two quotes from Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, and then we end on this photo of them together, and it's as if the photo is obviously this representation of what I think the movie is, which is that philosophically people can be completely divided. They can have completely different ideas about how something is done, but they can work together. They can live side by side. But what we see is the reality of that. We see the community trying to deal with that. And even though there's all sorts of characters in the movie that are aware of these leaders, talking about these leaders, what I took away from it was this sort of inability to actually absorb what they were learning and in some ways were actually preaching. Because to your partner's point, I do think the boombox and the spark that makes everything blow up, I think it is designed to be relatively small and pointless and something that you could look at and go, well, that was completely senseless. But such is the case with a lot of violence. The jungle here isn't too far from Brooklyn, so this lion does a thing or two. But anytime, I mean, if you try and again tell somebody that their behavior might be slightly offensive to you, in many ways that's the most offensive thing that you can do. What's so interesting in the plot is right before this sort of boom, this race riot, like you mentioned, there's this moment with
Wow.
yes, with Sal. How could I not know? Sal's famous pizzeria. Danny Aiello is the name I was looking for there. But he has this really tender moment with his sons and with Spike Lee, and he talks about the community and how these kids grew up, these people grew up on his food and how much that means to him. And so I love this juxtaposition of almost, in many ways, what feels like the end of the movie, where things should end, where it's like, oh, this is the nice moment, but then reality kicks in. I think that the lack of resolution is sort of the point, I guess, if that makes sense, that this is just as relevant in 2025 as it was in 1989. Anyway, like I said in my open, I feel like it's almost feels like a play when I was watching it with
Yes, for sure. It does. It feels very much like a Broadway play. And I don't know if that has to do with like the way it was shot and some of the I want to say set design, but was it actually shot on the streets of Brooklyn?
Believe it or not, this had $6.5 million budget. So I mean, really, really small budget. But yeah, shot on location. Our director of photography is Ernest R. Dickinson, who honestly has had much more of a prevalent kind of career in television. He's done a lot of stuff. His first movie was Juice. He did do Malcolm X later with Spike Lee, but I'll ask you really quickly before we move on. We got to get a grade for the plot. 1 out of 10, Lara. What would you, if you had to designate it a score, 1 out of 10?
I mean, I guess I would give it a 10. You know why? Because it's really a movie you could sit and talk about forever. It just sparks so much discussion. And I think for a viewer who's willing to look inside themselves and see, what were my thoughts and opinions while I was watching this, and what does this bring up for me? I think it would have been very easy for Spike Lee to make a similar movie where he made some of the characters right and some of the characters wrong. And then, the moral of the story is like racism is bad. And in fact, I looked it up in the film that won the Academy Award that same year in '89 was Driving Miss Daisy, which is like, oh,
What a juxtaposition of, yeah.
yeah, right. So he did the opposite. Ironically, it's not a black and white film. It's very gray. It's filled with nuance, and at times Sal is very loving and paternal to his sons and even to Mookie, and then he ends up making this massive mistake. And the same could be said for all the characters in the movie, that they are good people who are doing at times bad things or wrong things or right things. Who knows? Like who's the judge and jury, right?
But I think we are, right? Because that's kind of what I think the point is the film sort of forces the audience to not necessarily take sides, but see at least what I thought, which is all these characters are at the core the same. They seem to all have the same values. They're from the same place. It's just that they look different and they sound different and they do different things. By containing the film to one block, by presenting all of these colorful characters that all sound different and look different and react to different situations differently, it does highlight more than anything the thing that they have in common. The Malcolm X and MLK sort of symbology is it's like at the end of the day, especially in history in 2025, we look back and I think a lot of people just see them as black leaders. We see them as being very similar, and obviously their core fundamental philosophical ideals were the opposite. One is about passiveness and the other is about sort of taking action in response.
Right.
But they are effectively trying to achieve the same goal. Again, I grew up in a post do the right thing world. I feel like characters like Mookie, Radio Raheem, even Samuel Jackson's character, these are just sort of baked into the pop culture lexicon, or at least they were for me growing up.
Pretty amazing when you see the cast. The film opens with this like dancing montage of Rosie O'Donnell. Oh my God, thank God it's not Rosie O'Donnell.
Very different 1989 film. Yeah, there's no crying and do the right thing.
That would have been a whole different movie. Rosie Perez.
who's an avid listener of the show. So Rosie,
Hi,
don't be offended by that.
my fellow New Rican. Yeah, she's dancing. It feels very in living color, which is one of my favorite shows of all time. The first real like shot when the film starts is Samuel L. Jackson in the radio booth
Yeah.
at like announcing for the local radio. So the cast is just incredible right out of the gate. I think the characters make up the whole film. You feel like you're just getting sort of a glimpse of what it's like to be in that neighborhood, in that time. A lot of them are just completely overtly racist. But I think he allowed the characters to say what a lot of people are just sometimes thinking.
Mhm.
I mean, not me, because I'm not
Of
racist, but
course, no, you would never. There would never. Let us know in the comments which race you hate the most, and tank YouTube pushing this video anywhere.
but yeah, it's true. Like he just let it rip. I mean, at one point, there's a whole montage of people just talking, different characters talking directly to camera, making racial epithets as if they're yelling at one another, judging one another. I mean, I could just imagine at the time how shocking that was. Even though it seems shocking and wrong and offensive, there was an honesty to that.
It did feel. I know the sequence that you're talking about, and when I watched it, it is. And there's a lot of this movie that's sort of heightened visually, whether it, canted angles and things to almost make it, I don't want to say cartoonish, but a lot more animated than it would be. And I think that sequence that you're doing, or that you're referring to, I feel like that is almost meant to be comedic in some ways. There's such
Mhm.
an intensity, there's such a push. Most people are operating with bias, either consciously or unconsciously.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, in certain areas like the five boroughs of New York, whether it's 89 or 2025, a lot of that speak and a lot of that open mind of like, oh yeah, that group does this, we do it this way. It's just sort of loud and proud and spoken, even if it doesn't make any sense and it's completely hypocritical. I love the scene where they've just rioted Sal's and they're considering this mob is kind of considering mobbing the Korean grocery store across the street, and the Korean grocery store owner is saying, I am black, and they're all
Right.
sort of laughing at him, but he puts his hand out to shake it, and although they won't shake his hand, they do, I think, very much realize like, oh yeah, he is absolutely one of us.
Like, not to sound hokey, but I feel like this is like a film that should be shown in like schools. To me, the quotes at the end, at first I thought, oh, this is really heavy handed. Like, he's going to end with a quote from MLK. But then right after it is the quote from Malcolm X. And you're right, they have two very different perspectives. One, certainly advocated for a more spiritual, peaceful way of dealing with that. Malcolm X was like, if violence is necessary, you got to do what you got to do. I think what comes into question is what even is the right thing? The one thing that I did have an issue with, which I couldn't sleep, it was bothering me. Mookie's character was so likable and relatable. I mean, he didn't really have his shit together. He was like a pizza
Sure.
delivery
Yeah.
boy, his girlfriend, like, baby mama was kind of like up his ass about like when's he going to be a good dad, when's he going to spend time with them, when's he going to make more money. He was certainly struggling a bit to make ends meet, but he all in all was like a very likable character. The thing that I had the problem with was when all the shit goes down, they end up taking away and killing Radio Raheem. Right after that, Mookie picks up a garbage can and he throws it through the window of Sal's pizza shop. And then that's when everybody storms into the pizzeria after him and starts like destroying the property and lighting things on fire. And like they basically burn the whole place down. I mean, I think everyone was upset and angry, but that was his job. And Sal had been pretty kind to him. I don't know if this was Spike Lee's intention or not, but I did read that he possibly picked up the garbage can and threw it through the window as a way to save Sal and save the sons so that the angry mob didn't go after them physically, that they went after like the pizza shop
Hmm.
destroying the property rather than like harming them physically and potentially killing them, which I was like, oh, that's really smart. It's another layer to the film, right? Where you're like, oh, maybe he was trying to save him.
I think that's really interesting. I mean, I didn't get that from it. The way Mookie is written, I don't really think that aligns with the level of maturity and intelligence that that character would operate with. What I read that decision as, which I felt was really profound, was Mookie is the closest one to that family. He's the one in there working with them. Everybody on the outside of the shop is just a pizza goer, so to speak. They're just there. They go in and out. They have their various issues. Some of them don't. Mookie knows these guys, and I think that in the same way, John Turturro's character is always kind of racist towards Mookie, always sees him as just, a black kid who delivers pizza and nothing more. I think that the reality is Mookie maybe not that far on the racist spectrum, but I think he definitely sees these guys as it's just a job. It's a way to get money. I think he appreciates them. I think as much as he appreciates the job, he also doesn't like a lot of the things that go on there. He doesn't like the way he's treated. I think he very much feels the same way that a lot of people on the block do. And for most of the
Mhm.
movie up into that point, he's kind of playing this peacekeeper, between
Mhm.
his best friend, between these people that he likes and he respects. And I interpreted that it was the moment where he kind of snapped. I'm sick of this. I'm sick of this shit. I'm sick of protecting everybody. Here, let me open the door and you guys can go in and kind of have at it. And Saul and his family can finally sort of see that I've been almost this protector to you guys, that I've been helping you, which is why when he comes back later and asks for the money, not only did I feel like that felt pretty appropriate because he was sort of like, look, what happened last night wasn't a result of me, even though I threw the trash can through there, because it was just like, this was an inevitability. If you were not going to change your behavior and change the way you were acting, this was
Yeah.
inevitably going to happen. And I just looked at it as the dude just watched his friend get killed.
Yeah.
I don't think there's I mean, don't get me wrong. Like, I love the fan theory that maybe there's more going on here, and there was a deeper meaning behind Mookie. But if I'm watching the film for what it is, and I'm actually looking at what's going on screen, I don't think that there's enough information to support that. At least upon my last viewing. Maybe if I watch it again. But Mookie just seems like, look, he seems like a great hang, right? But he's not a guy that I would maybe ask to help me move because he's always late. I mean, he's at work.
He's not going to show up.
Yeah, and he
Yeah.
goes and he hangs out with this girl for a while. He goes back to his apartment and takes a shower. I mean, at one point they're saying, these pizza deliveries should not take 90 minutes each when you're walking
Mhm.
up the block. Mookie's a great kid, but he's definitely disconnected. I mean, he doesn't have this sense of responsibility for him to have that level of understanding in that tense of a moment. I don't know. I feel like that's a bit of a stretch, but I do like the idea. I don't know. That's just
Yeah.
let us
No,
know.
maybe you're right. Maybe you're right. I don't know. Maybe it was like something that honestly made me feel like uncomfortable about watching the movie. And I think that's kind of the whole point about it, right? Is that like it's not it's not like it's not a feel good, warm and fuzzy romantic comedy.
Sure.
It's like a film that really challenges you to think about people and dynamics and differences and perspectives. And I think I really liked his character. And maybe I didn't want to think that he was like
Sure.
capable of boiling over in his own way. It was very confronting.
Every character in this movie will disappoint you, but I think you will also like them. Radio Raheem, he's a cool guy. I wouldn't want to hang out with that guy. I'm just going to say it. He seems like an asshole. He seems like an
Yeah.
inconsiderate jerk.
Yeah. He's a
Giancarlo
dick.
Esposito's character is way too fiery and is this young guy who's clearly passionate and whatever, but has no filter, has no understanding of impact of his words and his actions. So I think every character in the movie is redeemable and lovable. The most aggressive character in Radio Raheem is killed. I mean, he pays with his life. So I feel like
Mhm.
there is a really good balance in this. Is if you fall in love with a Mookie because again he's really charismatic and fun, he is going to disappoint you. And I think that's kind of the
Yeah.
point of this movie is that nobody's really able to escape this block because they're ultimately kind of victims of their own shortcomings. Well, Lara, before we move on, I'm just curious. I mean, any other thoughts on the characters in the movie? There certainly are a lot of them.
Yeah, I might give the characters like a 6 or a 7 out of 10. Just because I feel like the female characters in the film weren't fully developed. I do have to say, I was like a little disappointed after seeing it so many years later. Like, I think the first time I saw it was probably like 20 years ago. Rosie Perez's character is just not really fully developed to me. She's, like his Mookie's girlfriend, the baby mama, but she's just sort of in the background and a little bit complainy. And I don't know, I have mixed feelings about the scene with them in the apartment. Part of me thinks it's like the way the shot is, the way the scene is shot is very cool and it's sort of erotic, um, especially in the midst of such a like tense and um, like aggravated hot day in the city. Like it does kind of break the tension a little bit. But I also feel like she doesn't really have much to say in the film. She's sort of just complaining about Mookie not being there and not making enough money. And she's like the baby mama. And to be honest, she's like a bit objectified. Like I feel like she served as a bit of eye candy in the film. And I wish that like he had made her character someone who had more of a point of view in the film.
I'm curious because Mookie is definitely, and we talk about this when we're talking about him, how he is likable, but he's clearly flawed. He's somebody who is not a great employee, clearly not, maybe not father of the year if he's only coming around once a week. So there is this sort of consistent theme where he's kind of using people. Do you feel like, is there a way that you think maybe Spike could have still told that story while, like you said, kind of injecting maybe something more into the Rosie Perez character? And I'm curious if is there maybe what would is there an element or something that you might inject or that you could say would like give that character more depth?
Yeah, I see what you're saying, and I agree with you. I think part of the Mookie character is supposed to be a guy who like even though he's likable, he's also questionable in his own way. Like he doesn't really have his shit together. He's not really super responsible. He's, like leaving the pizzeria for hours and then coming back. He's not taking care of his own kid. They're using Tina in a way to exemplify that about him, that he definitely could find some like improvement in different areas of his life. But I'm saying as a character in and of herself, we don't get to see her fleshed out as a whole person. Like she serves as just a bit of eye candy in the film, and we don't know anything about her character's hopes, her dreams. She's complaining to Mookie that he's not around, but why? Like, does she love him? Does she, want him to just be a more responsible father? Does she care about him? Does she want to be with somebody else? Does she have a job? We just don't know anything about her, but yet we see him like rub ice cubes all over her. As a female viewer, it's a very different experience, and but it's just something to be conscious and aware of, especially for female viewers when we watch a movie. And it's hard to resonate with the female characters because they don't really have much to say. I
Totally.
mean, I still think it's an amazing film, no question about it, and it's totally worth watching. But I think that Spike could improve a little bit in the feminism department. This is a more common conversation now than it would have been back then. And
Totally.
so I think watching the film now in 2025 and filtering it through this lens is a bit different than it was like back in the day.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that's what makes it a good conversation, a good point to bring up. And I want to get your score for the characters and performances. It sounds like it's maybe a 6.5, but before I do that, I'll also just add that we would be remiss if we didn't mention that the sexual connection between characters is sort of, albeit a brief, but it is an underlining theme. I think that seeing Mookie having this overtly sexual relationship that is literally resulted in him having a child that he's not necessarily very responsible for, I think is a good primer for the paranoia he then feels when he sees Saul being kind to his sister. And what and I think a lot of the viewers would probably agree with is Saul seems to have more of a maternal relationship with Mookie's sister, but Mookie very much sees that as a threat and sees, that is Saul maybe being attracted to her, maybe having different intentions. And I think Mookie's relationship with Tina is maybe designed to help us understand why he immediately sees that as a sexual thing. If we got to give characters and performances a 1 out of 10, you mentioned earlier maybe a 6 or a 7. Is that a 6.5? We want to lock in. What are you feeling?
Yeah, we could lock it at 6.5. I mean, I just feel like the female characters could have been more fully developed.
I'll ask you about the visual storytelling. We talked about it a little bit. You mentioned the open at the beginning, the In Living Color-esque dance opening. A lot of this movie is really colorful. I think when we talk about the heavy themes and the heavy performances, it's balanced really well visually to make it as entertaining as it could be, because like you said, this is a hard watch. This is a difficult film to talk about and think about, but I was so entertained by it. I mean,
Yeah.
visually there's not a frame of this movie that isn't just fun to look at. The three old guys just sitting on the sidewalk in front of that
Yeah,
red
totally. And
wall, and the use of heat and fire and reds and oranges and how that escalates. And there's this character who is sort of mentally challenged and has a stutter and is sort of a fixture of the block. As Sal's Pizza Shop is burning down and everyone's run out, he's left in there and he puts the picture of Malcolm X and MLK on the wall, and he's sort of smiling and there are just these flames behind him. And I thought, what an incredibly appropriate and beautiful frame. That moment almost perfectly symbolizes this sort of mentally handicapped person hanging up, feeling as if they've now
yeah.
fulfilled the journey when everything is in ruins and burning behind them. I was like, this is again some of the best visual metaphor I've seen.
Yeah, I feel like he used some really intense camera angles. The mayor and mother sister were talking to each other. So she's like up in the window.
Mhm.
He had these like extreme angles on both of them, and they were opposite. So whenever she spoke, it was like, fully tilted to the left. And then when he spoke, it was the opposite way. And it just really exemplifying that they were not seeing eye to eye.
Yeah.
They were like,
But I love what your point about the sort of canted angles. When you're on set and you're setting your horizon line, I mean that is really important because it kind of gives your whole image a sense of weight and how low or high your your horizon line is in the frame really kind of again sets that. And so the fact that Spike Lee is so aware of these canted angles, it's this great metaphor of just like, yeah, nothing's level here. Nothing is on balance with what you're normally seeing. Like when you come to this area, there's definitely its own sort of logic.
yeah, I think it adds to the feeling. If you like zoom out a little bit, the movie is really about perspectives. Those things sometimes go together like magnets, and sometimes they repel, and sometimes they just blow up in a big old fire.
They sure do. Well, visual storytelling. What would you give it? 1 out of 10.
I mean, you can't ask me that because I'm just gonna give it tens across the
It's okay.
board.
You're allowed to give it tens across the board. It is the gimmick of the show. I have one job here, and I have to ask you for your scores. I've locked in a 10. That brings us to use of sound. The use of sound in this movie, very important. I actually did not realize that Fight the Power by the NWA was released for this film. I didn't realize that
Yeah.
was a track made for this movie. It was released on July. The film was released a little bit later in July, but Fight the Power is released on July 4th as literally a promotional track for this movie, which is pretty incredible because again, that's a song that lives well in pop culture, and my whole life growing up never realized that was a movie track, a song made for a movie. It's pretty incredible.
Yeah. No,
Uh,
I didn't either. I didn't either. And it makes like the whole thing thickens the plot when you realize that he's walking around with this giant boombox that's blasting fight the power the whole time. I mean, it kind of paints a picture of a person who's looking for a fight.
and somebody
Yeah.
who feels, and I think a lot of young people, especially young men, young lions, you'll feel this sort of almost this need to like pound your chest and represent what you feel in this aggressive way. It's such a shortcoming because it never works. So few people actually respond to it, and it ends up creating way more problems than it ever solves. But that constant playing of fight the power, and then when it gets hit with the bat and the, everything about just the use of that song, it's kind of fascinating. You don't see movies these days where, or even really ever, where there's just one track that is almost its own character.
It's his anthem or his mantra. But like, yeah, where does that get you?
What it's balanced with is you have fight the power, it's blasting, but then the film has this really soothing jazz soundtrack, very similar to a She's Gotta Have It soundtrack. I love the positioning of those two things, where the block New York kind of has its own soundtrack, but then there's this like infiltration of this fight the power of this, kind of modern contemporary music, and the clash of these two things, but constantly coming back to that jazz, and especially at the end when you're seeing the two quotes over it. I don't know, I felt that was a really, really masterful decision, because I'm not sure any other choices would have left us with the same ability to palate what we were being given. But I'm curious, I have a feeling I know what you're going to give it. What would you give the use of sound there, Lara? What out of 10?
I'm trying to come up with something new here, but
No, please. You're not doing the wrong thing by giving us what you feel. Okay, so certainly nothing wrong with high marks.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think the juxtaposition of those two musical styles definitely, it sets the tone. Yeah, so 10 out of 10.
10 out of 10, locked in. That brings us to theme. Most of our conversation is obviously kind of been about the themes in this movie. I mean, I don't think we have to really unpack everything here, because we kind of already have been unpacking it. I said in my intro, this movie really wears its themes on its sleeve. I mean, it's not difficult to figure out what's going on here, but I do think that it's just as excellent as a conversation as you can have about it. I'm curious, any additional thoughts I should ask on sort of the themes of Do the Right Thing.
I mean, yeah, I could have sat and like talked about it for like, 2 hours.
Sure.
Differences, similarities, morals, ethics, yeah, family, friends, protecting and defending yourself and your own neighborhood and your property. There's so many layers to this. You could watch it, probably 10 times and see different things in the movie every time. You have to sort of sit with it afterwards and say, well, I don't know, like who was right and who was wrong and how did that all happen? I was like stunned by the fact that not only was this a relevant thing to make a movie about in 1989, but it's still relevant today. And I think that's the thing that stuck with me that made me really sad. There's so many similar situations that we can point to in the real world. Eric Garner, George Floyd, like there's just been so many very similar instances of this happening. And the fact that Spike Lee was pointing to this 30 years ago, it's insane.
There's no Do the Right Thing 36 years before Do the Right Thing. So you do wonder why in 1989 something comes out and in 2025 it's still such a relevant conversation. I don't think there's anything wrong with saying it shouldn't be. I think we as a culture and we as a people should be focusing more. And easy for a lion to say who lives in the jungle, I'll admit. But, I do think there's nothing wrong with expecting and wanting your community and people around you to be better. And we should not be repeating the same issues every few years generationally. And when you talk about a movie like Do the Right Thing and how it isn't as recognized the year it comes out compared to a movie like maybe Driving Miss Daisy, I don't know. I kind of wish that maybe this movie was shown a little bit more, talked a little bit more about, because it is such an easy watch in terms of it's very entertaining. There's so much value in it just as a filmmaker, as a lover of cinema. But yeah, culturally, it's just it's such an important conversation that's done so well.
100 out of 10.
100 out of 10. All right, first time on the show. This is only episode 4, but we've got the first ever 100 out of 10. All right, well now we're thinking we got all of your scores locked in, so I can read off the total for you here. You gave the plot a 10, the characters and performances a 6.5, the visual storytelling a 10, the use of sound a 10, and the themes a 10. So safe to say you like this movie pretty well. Uh, that's a total of 93, Lara, not to be confused with another number. 93. Safe to say that's an A? This joint receives an A?
Yeah, this joint gets an A minus, B plus.
A minus, locked in for a 93. To your 10, I gave the plot a 10. I gave the characters and performances a 10. Visual storytelling and sound, totally agreed with you. I gave them both a 10. And in the themes, I gave it a 9 to your 10. Just shy. I thought, again, this movie does a really, really great job of showcasing its themes and traversing it. But because of what the theme is, it's almost impossible for the movie to itself be an example of it, which is just a little gimmick that Al has. So I gave the movie a 98 out of 100 to your 93. I would hope Spike and Giancarlo Esposito I hope they're all very satisfied with that score. But Lara, thank you so much for coming into the jungle and helping me do the right thing.
Oh, my pleasure. No, this is awesome. I mean, sitting here having coffee, talking to you about movies, what could be better?
Oh, I love it. Well, Lara, will you maybe come back some other time and talk about another movie?
Yeah, hell yeah.
All right. Well, until next time, just tread lightly when you go into those pizza shops, okay? Before we jump into the next review, I just wanted to thank you for listening this far, and I ask that you please give us a follow if you're enjoying the show, as well as comment what movies you'd like to hear us score on Real Talk. We're almost certainly on your favorite social media platform, so search Al the Movie Lion wherever you scroll. I grew up in a world where Spike Lee was so mainstream, it was easier to pretend you've seen his work than it was to watch it. From Lola Darling to Radio Raheem, the young filmmaker had already proven by the early 1990s that his control of the craft is powerful because Spike Lee can present black characters and voices like no one before him. You might believe the great Allah himself designed time just so Lee could tell the story of Malcolm X, because this is a truly epic telling of an incredibly epic man. Malcolm X the film does exactly what Malcolm X the man did, which proves that what's required to be a successful leader of faith is often what's absent in successful followers, and it is the tragic irony of brother minister Malcolm X slaughtering in front of his children by a group of radical puppets that drives home the film and the man's life message. If you are independent of any system, you will be labeled a threat to it. Any great film will make you feel a range of emotions, but I'm not so sure I've ever screened a biopicture that so successfully captured the frustration arrested within a culture and translates it so masterfully. This is a beautifully tragic film that knows what it is and what it's trying to do, while perfectly telling the story in a way that all audiences can absorb and appreciate. I'm incredibly lucky to be joined now by cinematographer Professor Timothy Richardson in the jungle to discuss this masterwork. Brother Professor Richardson, thank you so much for coming in today. I really appreciate it. Welcome.
Thank you for creating this format. Thank you for making space, letting me be here to chat a little bit with you, man.
Do you mind just maybe giving us a little bit of a primer of kind of like what your relationship with the movie is?
I believe I was in 10th grade. And it was a teacher named Miss Jenkins. I'll never forget her. She screened the film. And I remember being so moved, especially it was the scene his double dolly shot where Sam Cooke comes on and, Malcolm, we're communicating. He knows that his human experience is about to conclude. And it just moved me how we got to that point and to see this man's metamorphosis. So I then went on to, went to college and, the book always kind of traveled with me over the years as I changed as a man. My perspective on the book changed, which is kind of poetic. And then it became like I read the book, his autobiography 3 times and then saw the movie again. So, I kind of have at least my own personal understanding close to the subject matter of it, to be able to, dive into it and talk all things, plot and film.
First, we're going to talk about plot. This is a long movie. This is a little just a little bit shy of 3.5 hours. But it's not really surprising because this is a life that encompasses so much. I mean, you really do, need that real estate to tell this story. I'm just curious, when it comes to the plot, obviously you said you've read, his autobiography multiple times. How do you feel the film does articulating that story, just specifically from a plot standpoint?
Yeah, transcribing something from literature can always, being filmmakers be such a pressure. And for a moment, this person has come back to life and they're up on the screen. I think Spike Lee has a really intricate, really, interesting perspective on storytelling. So he told it in the Spike way that, and, in combination with Denzel's performance, that allowed us to escape to a world. And then having read the book, I loved that it seemed to touch on the central themes in his life almost like in a three act. I feel like he shoots theater on camera. So, I definitely was able to see, from the man that was no became Detroit Red to to his incarceration to, him joining the Nation of Islam. I thought I did a great job chronologically, touching on points, whether that was, using a tool, a flashback to just give us some context to understand who he is and what he dealt with in his childhood too. And then it would just help the movie progress on. And I mean, yeah, I thought it did a really good job.
It's this interesting choice where the movie doesn't like it doesn't ever really establish a time. In so many periods, you'll just see in the lower third or something, oh, 1960, 19, whatever. And it doesn't really do that. In fact, there are moments where you kind of there's a significant jump forward in time, and you wouldn't really realize it unless you were paying attention to what the characters are saying because they reference something that's happened, or you can just tell. But it does just really kind of gracefully move through time, almost as again in the way when we look back at our own lives, you don't really remember specific, oh, this was that day, this was that time. So you do just kind of live the life with him, and you kind of navigate, like you said, from point A at the beginning of the movie, which is such an extreme to point B in terms of the character arc and how that's articulated. Well, I'm curious then if I could get a 1 out of 10 for the plot specifically. What does Brother Richardson give just the plot? 1 out of 10.
I'm gonna give it a strong. I'm gonna say 10. I'm gonna say 10 because I've read the book as much as I've read the book.
Out of the gate with a 10, I like it. And look, your score that you're going to give this, I think we can all lean on. Okay, this is the score we should be listening to. Over here, I just watched the movie, so my scores secondary in this.
with a
But that
with a
brings us
little bit of innocent bias, but it never hurt nobody.
look. And I have a feeling if you're anything like me, you're probably going to be handing out a lot of tens in this one. But again, I don't want to spoil too much. We're now talking about characters and performances. It's one of the reasons I kind of sped through plot a little bit because there's so many great characters and performances in this movie that I want to talk about. It would be crazy for us to not start with Mr. Denzel Washington as Malcolm X. It's hyperbole to say he was born to play it, but it really does. I mean, you talk about a performance where it's like, oh, no one else could do that. Margot Robbie is Barbie. Malcolm X is Denzel Washington. Who else could be it?
Yeah, you know what? Denzel took a year off from anything else when he got booked for this role. And I think outside of the presentation of the film as a whole, right, it's a labor of artistic love, but I think we saw a performance photographed that embodied Denzel's like his character work to go travel, for him to go talk with remaining members of Malcolm's family, to telling his agent, I'm taking nothing for a whole year. I'm going to submerge myself in speeches, whatever archival footage he can get his hands on. You see Denzel, then at certain points, he just slips under that magical moment where we get lost a little moment because he's an activist and thank God for history because, we know about Malcolm X, but there's something special that happens in film, right? Where it's art imitating life that allows us to just get lost in it and see the closest we're going to get to a very subjective, intimate look into this man's life. And Denzel allowed us to experience an array of all the emotions of what Malcolm went through as a man. And I thought it was powerful.
And I don't even mean this as a criticism because Denzel is so charismatic. When we watch, especially a lot of his contemporary roles, you do see a lot of Denzel in it. Even recently, he was, in my opinion, the best, maybe the only good part of a Gladiator 2, but there's still a lot of like Denzel that you see in this.
That
very
is
much.
not the case with Malcolm X. Like he is fully in this character. Again,
Mhm.
there's a lot better impersonators out there than I am who could slip right into a great Denzel Washington because he has this pattern, because he has this sort of this rhythm that he speaks with. That's not present in this movie. To see an incredible actor like truly doing character work, which again I want to tread lightly, but that's not how I would describe most of Denzel's career. It's not really
Mhm.
character work. He is a movie star, a leading man in the truest sense of the word. The cool thing about this movie is what it does with cameos. You have Reverend Al
Mhm.
Sharpton, who has a little cameo at one point, who's
Yep.
preaching on the streets. The movie ends with Nelson Mandela teaching, which I'm literally getting goosebumps as I'm saying that now.
Only time being on camera in a film. That was the only time. Like Spike Lee was the only person to ever capture that.
And what's so
That's
amazing about
crazy.
that, and I'm glad that you said that because the point that I want to make is this movie is about community and
Mhm.
it's using the process of making a film something as throwaway as a cameo, and it creates something bigger than the film by doing that because you see the sense of community. You see these black leaders coming together to tell a story. And man, that just it really does my heart good because it's so rare in any work that you can just have a moment like that. And cinema allows you with its tools to kind of have just 5 seconds of, oh, hey, there's Al Sharpton. And it leaves you with this feeling of like, oh, this is important. Important
Mhm.
people came
Mhm.
together to tell this story. A really important character in this movie who's played by himself is Martin Luther King. I love the choice that they don't cast an actor to play Dr. King. They
Mhm.
just let him exist in file footage.
Yeah.
A small
Elroy Lindo. Yeah. I mean, come on.
the legend.
Has gone on to be a multi-film collaborator with Spike Lee from The Five Bloods, and yeah, from yeah, man, he's up there. I mean, yeah, and Angela Bassett, I thought was just a bedrock. The essence and the core of a black man is the strong love of a black woman. It really just exemplified black love. So much that he's dealing with personally and then externally in the world, and you just always saw this strong connection between the two, which I just thought was beautiful. And they explored struggle and they explored love. And she knew him from a very boyish standpoint, but also the man they, came to know as Malcolm X. It's just beautiful how every character, Spike Lee playing Shorty, incorporating himself in the film was, really, dope.
I gotta say about Betty or Angela Bassett's character, she has this burden of having to react to Malcolm's death. If you're asking an actor to perform, one of the hardest things you can ask them to do is be hysterical because it seems easy, right? Just go in there and be crazy. But she has to panic, but she has to have a level of control and wisdom. And it's just a moment. But again, what she really embodies in that she's the vessel for all of us, the audience, for so many people before the movie. And it's really difficult to think of a performance, or rather just an ask that a script is going to give to a character and say, or an actress and say, hey, just in a moment, you got to represent the world. I mean, she does it as well as anybody could. She's this sort of emotional bedrock for a character
Mhm.
who really is, I mean, he's purpose driven, but there is almost a lack of humanity as a result of that because he's so
Mhm.
focused on the bigger picture.
Mhm.
So being
Mhm.
able to have this kind of grounded romantic
Yeah.
relationship, I think really does inject so much humanity into him, and she represents that. We would be remiss if we did not talk about Elijah Muhammad, who was played by Al Freeman
Yes.
Jr. Again, talk about big shoes to step into. I can imagine that's a pretty
Man.
intimidating role.
At the time before I got into, I always knew Malcolm was part of the Nation of Islam, but I think being introduced to the film caused me to, just explore and, research more into it and, knowing what Malcolm's relationship was like and, his chapters in it and what he accomplished in it and what he accomplished when he exited. And for lack of a better term, just on point. I felt it was, at just showcasing this strong bond between Elijah Muhammad and Malcolm, but then doing a good job at kind of in a way, like in any, good film, although we knew the story behind him, I think Spike did a good job at almost making us, like in any film where it's like you don't know the plot's unfolding, it's like what is going to transpire after, Malcolm separates from the Nation of Islam. There's conspiracy theories and all these different things, and It's crazy. I was feeling that as an audience member at the time and even knowing the story, but I was still lost in the like, where's this gonna go now? What's gonna happen? You know? He wasn't afraid to if somebody's perspective was to villainize Elijah Muhammad, or if he did a great job at just being so neutral, just being the man that he was. And I love that because then it just allows people to kind of form their own perspectives, and then that creates conversation.
On that note, Tim, then I will get a score 1 out of 10 characters and performances.
I'm gonna say a 10. I personally feel, I know he got it for Training Day. I personally feel Denzel should have won the Oscar in 1992 for this one.
Yeah, I've always kind of believed that like the way you win an Oscar is by like not winning an Oscar. In hindsight, to look back, and recognize how important this performance is. But as much as I love Training Day and I love Denzel in Training Day, I do think this film just asks more of him. So I do agree. I
Yeah,
mean, when you
yeah.
compare the two, this does seem like it's more of an appropriate award winner. But regardless, luckily Denzel's got one little golden guy that he canceled, even though it should probably be two. But we'll come back to that. We'll come back to that in another segment. That moves us on to visual storytelling. I'm really excited to talk to you about this because you yourself are a cinematographer, a purveyor of images, moving images. There's only one shot I want to point out, and then I want to give you the floor because it really stood out to me. It was early on in the first act where Malcolm's mother has been hospitalized or maybe even put into sort of a mental health clinic, but she is just in this completely white room and it's
Yeah.
all white tile and she's in white and it's just this her face and maybe her arms are these little pops of, brown skin in this otherwise completely white world that has consumed her. And to me, that's perfect cinematography. To me, that you put that frame on the wall that completely tells the story of what the character is at in this beautiful metaphor. And Spike Lee, in all of his films, uses color so masterfully. But that's why I want to point out this shot because there's no color in it other than the black skin. And I feel like that's the point. And I thought it was so awesome in a movie that really doesn't have to be visually stylized, that it still is, but it's not stylized in a way that's distracting. The floor is yours. What do you think, Tim, of the visual storytelling in this picture?
I had put up Film Grab again. I was looking at it, earlier today, but I'm looking at it again, and wow, you got me looking at that exact still, thinking about how, the mise en scene and who Malcolm's mother, is in his life, and who she, her husband was. His dad was a follower of Marcus Garvey. So, just to see, what is a strong woman who's, of course, pro-black. She, like her, her children, to almost the metaphor of what Malcolm's life in a way felt like he was going through, like what he's dealing with in the world, his mother's mental declining health. How is he existing in a world as a black man? It's absolutely beautiful. And then touching on hues, of course. Spike Lee is a painter. Start with School Days, and you can go to Do the Right Thing. He was a great collaborator with Ernest Dickinson.
Ernest Dickinson, the legendary Ernest Dickinson, gone
Yes,
on to be a
yeah.
wonderful director and has had a great run on television and all
Uh,
sorts of different shows.
I would like to say their language exists in the realm of emotional expressionism. Spike's not afraid to switch up the format and, throw in 16 millimeter footage just to, for characterization. It was very film noirish at times. You had like hard light blasting through blinds.
Oh yeah.
I think the moments where we specifically started to get a little lost and say, hey, I could see Malcolm X was when it would switch to the black and white.
Oh
When it
yeah.
was
Oh
to
yeah.
the black and white. And I caught the language of every black and white still was paying homage to an actual still you can find like Malcolm X in. And I think that language really helped us start to just give into the biopic, like, wow, he's recreating photography.
By virtue of recreating those photos, recreating that footage. What you're also doing is you're taking footage that the audience is familiar with before you go into the picture. And so
Right.
it becomes this, again, visual metaphor where when you remove color, all of a sudden Malcolm is having this, what dare I say, black and white conversation as a black man talk to white
Yes,
people.
yes,
And
yes,
it's only when we come
yes.
back out of that footage that we've maybe seen before the movie, that we're back in this fully saturated color world that is the life of Malcolm, not just necessarily the Malcolm we knew, so to speak, or the Malcolm that exists outside of the movie.
We talked earlier about the double dolly shot that is just signature, for Spike. I mean, just like what a, way to communicate just the central theme of like, what is this character going through psychologically? It's a moment, life around them is moving, but we're just isolated. And it's just the craziest thing the way he designed that shot.
Do you mind maybe for the listener describing what the double dolly shot is if they're unfamiliar?
So Spike has this, crazy rig of like, so he lays down some, dolly tracks, of course, and you usually have two people who are pushing or manning, Spike changed the game when he, decided to put the actual actor on the dolly, and then there's a dolly in front of that dolly. So you have two dollies that are, just on track. So it's like a little train that's just moving, right? So what happens there is if you're just focused on the characters, specifically from like a medium close up, the world around is going to seem like it's just kind of passing by and the characters kind of floating and we don't know how that's happening. Really cool. It's really expressionistic. It's impossible to not feel something behind it. He's done it, basically in all of his films and to me, it's just like a really immersive move. And I thought it was just heartbreaking and just fantastic and genius to for that shot to happen at that moment in the film. We get to finally have this beautiful double dolly shot of him coming towards the camera, like we get to see Malcolm X.
That's a
Yeah,
great explanation, though, of the double dolly shot because it is a signature of Spike's. It does exist in almost all of his work. And is this really kind of beautiful use of something that seems really simple but is always effective? I got to get a
yeah.
1 out of 10 from you. What do you give it? 1 out of 10.
Yeah, I'm gonna say 10, and then for this 3 hour
320, 322.
they shot this on film. I haven't had the privilege yet of shooting on film, the honor of it. I shoot, digital. But when look at this film, the reason why I give it a 10 is it just almost eternalizes the film. Something about film makes it this portrait that'll just forever hang. It has a texture that I always will connect you back to the time period, everything. So, I give it a 10.
In 92, there is no just looking at a monitor and you see what you're going to get. These
Right.
filmmakers, Ernest Dickinson, has to break out the light meter, has to understand beforehand exactly
Yeah.
what he wants everything to do so they can calculate and dial it in. And sure, he's going to look through the viewfinder and he's going to be able to frame it up, but they're not going to know until the next morning if
Yes.
if everything landed. So it is a different craft. The way this movie is made is not the way movies are made today, and that's not me dumping on movies today, but
Of course.
we do have to give credit where it's due. These are master filmmakers making something that is not just, oh, a couple beautiful images. There are hundreds of beautiful images stretched across 3.5 hours. But that being said, that brings us to use of sound. Spike Lee, definitely a guy that knows how to use music, knows how to use sound effects. Um, we talked a little bit earlier about one of the uses of music. I'm going to come back to that in a minute because I just want to ask you right out of the gate, the use of gun shots in this movie and how they're associated very playfully with these sort of finger guns. But there is always this intensity and this sort of reminder of this is how this is going to end.
In a way, it was a little motif that he was storytelling through, and even in I believe what is it the Foley itself of like even in the scene where he is assassinated for 19 making the film in 1992, it was so believable. I know exactly what you're talking about, like using the sound of a gun to like cut into a different scene, like coming from a different scene, right? Whether that was like his dad who was outside holding a rifle to hit like himself holding a rifle later on in the film with that iconic window shot of him holding the AK-47. The subcontext, Spike was definitely addressing, gun violence. There already had been in that last decade, political, assassinations that had happened. it really, packed an emotional punch, like you said. It kind of just lets you know the tone of like how this is gonna end.
I'm just curious, what did you think of the soundtrack in Malcolm X? Because it is a soundtrack that time-wise lines up, just like a Goodfellas. There's music in there, but it also is celebrating something a lot deeper. You're not just hearing black voices, you're not just hearing black songs you've heard hundreds of times, but you're seeing them juxtaposed with images that gives a meaning that at least for a white lion thought, oh, I think this is what they've been saying about the whole time. You know,
Yeah. I thought it was great, first off, late 50s or, even early 50s, like early 60s. Even when Malcolm was little, the type of music he was listening to and what type of, artists, being listened to. And like that was in combination with, white artists and black artists. It was a very diverse palette. It introduced me to, it introduced my ears to music that I had never heard before. At that point, Sam Cooke and, using that song in the film, that song's at that point, I mean, at least 30 years old,
oh, yeah.
and for it to still be so impactful, still so soulful. He uses music poetically. I feel like he does a great job at not just using it as like a regular sound cue to kind of help us carry out of this scene, but it's really a character. Like the
Yeah.
music aids in performances. It's a guiding hand.
1 out of 10, Tam. What are we giving use of sound?
What are we what are we giving news to sound? 10. We're gonna give it a 10.
Don't feel bad, Tim. Look, a lot of people get nervous on this show when they hand out Tims. I don't think that's fair. Good movies deserve good reviews. It brings us to theme, and I think what's interesting when you're given a biopic, when you're given a real life story, is it's like you can't really reverse engineer a story from theme. Not every filmmaker does that, obviously, but I do think all good art is very aware of what it's trying to do because, in my opinion, good art is communicating. That's what it's doing. To me, this movie does an amazing job of navigating different themes that I feel like were completely obviously inspired by the real life of Malcolm X. Themes of tribalism, self discovery, loyalty, and betrayal are probably the two kind of biggest themes, and also cultural trauma.
Definitely, I mean, definitely in alignment with the ones you just said. See, that's what I love about, film is that it really allows us to hear, how someone, takes a film and what, all those, ring loud to me. And then especially that, just the saying where you start isn't where you have to end. The biggest thing to me is just the metamorphosis of what it is to be a human being here on earth and choosing the new you over the old you. You get to see him shed a layer, almost like a butterfly. You see him go into this cocoon and he comes out and we're almost mourning, the Detroit Red and the Malcolm we got to know with the suits and, what seemed like this cool character was kind of living this life until it slowly started to just kind of unravel and get ahead of him. And I definitely saw that. Definitely, cultural trauma. I think the still itself when you and it's I think it's a top down shot where you can see Malcolm, his body laying on the ground, and like you said, it was a very brutal death. And we talk about the power of imagery, bringing truth to power. It's something viscerally moving to see, bodies, black bodies hurting another black body, being in the black community, that's not something you can take in with, any type of desensitized perspective. It emotionally affects you, not just seeing a man that was killed, but seeing a man killed by somebody who would look like your uncle or your dad, and just wondering like, how do we get here? It's deep. It's something that could, I would say if there was a forum, it'd be a very deep conversation, behind it.
It doesn't really matter what you believe in if you have the courage to fight for that. If you have the
Mm,
courage to represent it, you will probably only be the only soul that truly understands what you're doing. And
mm,
even the people who love you, like your wife, are probably going to ask you to dial back sometimes. You might
mm,
die for your cause, which, as tragic as it is, as we look back at history, that death, I do think, catapults Malcolm X into, the a global culture. We see so many kids at the end saying, "I am Malcolm X, I am Malcolm X, I am Malcolm X." I don't know if that happens if he's still with us today. I do think that one of the reasons Malcolm is such an important character in history and is so well articulated in this movie is because he is able to acknowledge his flaws. He is able to change and grow, but still never lose any momentum of self.
And just one more on theme, right? And I think it's also a reflection on how much time we have here on Earth, and when we, are focused on a mission. In his book, I'll say this: there's a lot of quotes by Malcolm I remember, but Malcolm stated that in all our deeds, the proper value and respect for time will determine success and failure. And I think that's just so powerful for a man. It seemed like the burden of knowing that you have, like we all know that ultimately we will finish our human experience, but as though sometimes people can just live as though life is infinite and just living in that. And every day you just imagine how present he would still would try to be while communicating the message, knowing at any point in time, I mean, it's just layers, man.
And he
Yeah.
literally dies communicating his message. I mean, he is on the pulpit when he's
Yeah.
slain, and that courage. And I mean, we see it in the movie. He doesn't even blink, smiles at the man who shoots him. And this is a real bold statement I'm about to make. So, Spike, let us know in the comments how off I am. But I truly think that Malcolm X, the film, is a statement that Malcolm X, the man, is the contemporary Christ. He is the Black Jesus that he sort of talks about in the movie. I mean that from a theoretical storytelling standpoint. I'm
Of
not
course.
implying
Of
that
course.
the second coming of Christ happened. I mean,
Robert said,
maybe,
of course, because you know how the chat is. You know how
yeah, exactly. Maybe that is what I'm saying for engagement purposes. You go, guys, get ahead, get real angry in the comments and let me know. No, but I do think again we talk about Spike Lee is a very artistic storyteller, and I believe after watching this movie that is the statement Spike Lee was trying to make, and it's just that's just my take, that's my reaction. It would be very difficult for me to think of a contemporary leader other than Malcolm X who I could so closely point to and go, that's the story of Christ, like right there. Any case, I digress. 1 out of 10. What do you give the theme, Tim? Because then I get to give you the whole shebang. But if you give this a 10, I don't even have to reveal the score. I
Yeah, I'm gonna give it a 10. I'm
love it.
curious to see what it calculates to, though.
Yes. Well, we gave the plot a 10, the characters
Okay.
and performances a 10. The
I love
visual
that.
storytelling also received a 10. You gave
Okay.
the use of sound a 10. And just a reminder, only seconds ago, you gave the theme a 10, which gives us 100% for Malcolm X. In terms of the plot, I gave it a 9.5, and the only reason I'm saying that is because this movie is based on source material, right? It's based on book. But even as I say that, it's kind of not fair. But I'm gonna stick to my guns for now, only because I gave the characters and performances a 10. I gave the visual storytelling a 10. I gave
Yeah.
the use of sound a 10, and I gave the theme a 10.
Yeah.
So
Right.
I'm Spike again. You can be mad at me for the half point, but that's a 99 to your 100. I think that officially makes this the highest scored film in the series so far. It's only episode 4, but I have a feeling it's going to be really difficult for any film to top this. I really, really enjoyed this movie. Although it's close to 3.5 hours, I can't wait to check it out again. Tim, I'm so glad you were able to come today and hang out and talk about this classic. Maybe I could put you on the spot. What are a few of your other favorite Spike Lee joints?
Yeah, man. The Five Bloods, the Black Klansman.
Oh, yes, of course.
That's that's one to get into. That's a really good film.
Loved having you on the show. I'm so glad you could come to the studio. And it sounds like you're down to come back.
Absolutely loved it. I answered the call, man. I will always answer the call when it comes to community and filmmaking. Count me in, man. I'm looking forward to future conversations for sure.
If you are interested perhaps in pursuing an education yourself in the film world, which God only knows what that's going to look like in the next couple years, but hey, I'm keeping it positive. Uh, Tim is a professor at the genuinely world-renowned Full Sail University. Full Sail University is and has been for many, many years now a premier destination for anybody who's looking to study film and television. Don't want to turn this into too much of a commercial for Full Sail, but you will get to perhaps experience the great professor, Timothy Richardson, who, again, I was so glad to have here today. So, Tim, until next time, thank you for coming, and we'll see you next time. The more I study the early works of Spike Lee, it breaks my heart to see so many incredibly relevant themes being expertly discussed and presented that modern audiences seem to think have never been explored. If Malcolm X the film was released today and you changed nothing about it, I truly believe it would be received as a masterpiece and resonate with audiences all over the world. But unfortunately, in 2025, the same team is releasing work that fails to have any relevance beyond an exercise in style. I was overwhelmed with goosebumps during the closing moments of the film, and when I heard the final voiceover say, "He didn't hesitate to die because he loved us so," like a religious epiphany, it hit me. The great Muslim leader, Prince Malcolm X, is the story of Christ, a man whose purpose was so powerful he rose from nothing and forever changed the world by proving if you are brave enough to live a life of freedom, you will absolutely be positioned as a threat against it. If you're going to dissect an epic, I believe you need a man of culture and integrity. So I'm very lucky to have with me the founder of Nefarious Media Network, Mr. Nate Milton. Brother Milton, welcome to the jungle. I'm so happy to have you here, and thank you for helping me score a big one.
No problem, Al. I'm glad that you invited me to this jungle. I hear they have fun and games here, but there's a lot to dissect when you look at Malcolm X, which is, in my opinion, Spike Lee's finest work. But before all that, I've heard a couple of your episodes. You're pretty good, man. But the question that needs to be asked that nobody else has asked, not even my dear friend Ahmad Butt, how are you talking, brother? Like, is nobody realizing that there is a lion with a podcast studio in the jungle, and we are speaking to him, and he is speaking back? I'm not saying anything negative about you, Al. I'm just saying we need to address the lion in the room.
You are a curious mind, and it does. I've checked the comments. Nobody's, and again, maybe it means we live in a more accepting world than I thought. By the powers that Real Digital has presented in the production world, anything is possible, including a lovable lion. That's right, Albert the lion can talk, and luckily I get to, because I get to dissect great films. So that's as much of the curtain as I can peel back. The good folks powering the show have used their magic to bring me, the mascot of Real Digital Media and Consulting Services, to life.
Yes, that's an answer I can accept. I can live with that truth. Truth is a theme of Malcolm X, so I appreciate you living in your truth, Al.
Well, Nate, before we start to dissect the movie, if you wouldn't mind maybe kind of priming us a little bit on, maybe when you saw the movie, kind of what your relationship was like when you saw it the first time, because I've got to imagine you did not see it for the first time screening it for the show.
No, I've seen this movie several times over the course of my life, and the first time I saw it was back in '92, and I just remember the hype surrounding this film, from everything from the marketing of the film to you couldn't walk down the street or watch a basketball game or watch a baseball game without seeing somebody with the X logo hat. But I'm going to go back a little bit further than that, Al, because the first time I really learned about who Malcolm X was would have been in the 7th grade. I think I can say I was a smart child, but I was not a very good student. And I would often end up in detention or study hall. And one of my attendants at study hall, much like Brother Baines in this film, sometimes you need somebody to, guide you along that path and point you in the right direction. She was like, "You're pretty smart, but you're not doing great in class. You like to read because you're always in the library. Here, read this." And she handed me a copy of Alex Haley's The Autobiography of Malcolm X. Like, I was just so into it. Anytime I had free time after school, I'd be back into the book. That was kind of my first introduction to who Malcolm X was as a historical figure. When we flash forward to '92, and it's like, yeah, this movie's coming out, directed by Spike Lee and starring, by the way, Denzel Washington, who even at that time was already hailed as one of the great actors of our generation. And so I was hyped for it, and I was hoping that the film could kind of live up to my expectations.
I remember really feeling like, oh, Malcolm X is largely misrepresented. Obviously, you read the autobiography when you were a young man, but was that your sort of takeaway when reading the book that, oh wow, this guy that I've always heard as being like described as militant or sort of the violent, I don't know, side B to Martin Luther King's pacifist side A, which is just quite frankly not true. But I'm just curious, was did you have a similar response when reading the book?
Slightly similar, just kind of growing up in a Black household. My dad is a former Navy chaplain and Baptist minister. My mom was a school teacher and is currently a Lutheran minister. And so, they were always like, hey, get your head in the books, read about your history, learn about your history. So I knew a little bit about Malcolm X. I knew he wasn't this caricature that a lot of the mainstream media kind of painted him as, but it's the same thing that happens to MLK after MLK dies. Like, he's reduced to, oh, that's the I have a dream speech. That's the everybody love everybody speech. It's like, no, Malcolm was more complex than that, just as MLK was more complex than this kind of neat little box that history tries to put him in. When I read the autobiography, it was just kind of like, yeah, like this gives more context, even more so than I did growing up in my home with my parents.
And I'll just say, like, I am a lion that grew up in a white household, so it is nice to hear that there is two different perspectives kind of coming to the same place. Where you, having grown up in a household where Malcolm X was probably spoken about much differently, let's be completely honest, how it sounds like the autobiography, and by extension we'll find out in a second if the film validated that for you more, whereas from my perspective it opened my eyes. Let's fast forward to 1992. You see the movie. If we're just talking about plot, did the experience of watching the movie enhance what you read in the book? Did it give you something maybe you hadn't thought about or seen?
It absolutely did, Al. And I think there will be things that the written word cannot convey that moving pictures can. When I read in the book about the character of West Indian Archie, who was played by Delroy Lindo in the movie, I had this idea of who West Indian Archie is in my head. But then when we see him on the screen and how he is at once like just this cool, calculating figure, but also like that's a guy you don't want to mess with because there's some menace there. Or the way that Shorty, the character Spike Lee portrays, and Malcolm, when they're in their zoot suit days and wearing the conch hairstyles and they're dancing at the jazz club. These are things that a book can tell you, but when you see it happening on the screen in live action, it just kind of hits you differently. A lot of the plot of the movie I kind of knew going in just by reading the book. Just seeing it realized in live action just took all of those things that were in my head for those so many years. This is 100% what I was seeing in my head. I just didn't know how to formulate it.
Spike Lee is such a poetic storyteller. Like, he is somebody who really uses the camera and color and music to extend beyond the realities that most, or I don't want to say most, but that other storytellers do. And it's interesting, and because I agree with you that I think this is Spike Lee's strongest work. And it's interesting that that comes from, again, a biographical telling, of something that isn't at all based in fantasy. It's very much based in real life. And he brings this, again, poetic handling of the storytelling that I think really elevates it. And this very much feels like not an answer to, but just an equal to Goodfellas, in that it evolves in a certain way. It presents characters that only live in certain acts of the movie, but our main character evolves and learns and loves a life, but is betrayed by that life, and so on. Just in terms of the plot, because everything's so rich, and I know we're going to talk more about it. What would you give the plot 1 out of 10 for Malcolm X?
Whew. I mean, it's obviously the source material is already great, so you're building on a great foundation when you tell this story. And I think everything flows for the most part. Like, you've got 3 distinct chapters of Malcolm X's life. You got the beginnings where he's Malcolm Little and he's in Harlem and he's enjoying all the things that a young man in Harlem can enjoy. You got Malcolm X once he gets out of prison and he joins the Nation of Islam. And then you've got, Malcolm X after he leaves the Nation of Islam. And I think for the most part, it's told in a concise way. The plot moves. It doesn't drag, which is kind of crazy, Al, for a movie that's over 3 hours long.
Yeah.
There is a little bit of clunkiness, and I still wrestle with this part of the movie because the ending, after they do the eulogy and we get to the Nelson Mandela part, I still kind of bump up against that. But everything else to me is just almost pitch perfect. I'll start with the 9. I'll give it a 9.
Locking in the 9. No, I love it. Look, we're not too far off on our scores there, and it's difficult, I think, for any storyteller when you're taking material that's real and you have to encompass a whole life. And I think Spike Lee does just as about a good a job as you could do, but it is also still an auteur's film. It's very much a Spike Lee movie. So I can see when you talk about like The Last Shot, for example, it's very much a choice. It's an artistic decision, and I can see how that might not land, all the time with everybody. Regardless, let's talk about characters and performances. I want to focus really quickly before we get to the obvious. You mentioned earlier Delroy Lindo, and he is sort of like the Robert De Niro character of when I was talking about Goodfellas earlier. Like he's this sort of, but the arc is so extreme, and when we find him at the end and we see what Malcolm could have been, I just thought that was so powerful and profound. And for a guy who's so suave and cool and scary at the beginning to then be is so authentically portraying this guy who's reduced to, he needs help to move his arms, his legs. It's just wow, what a powerful performance. It would be really easy to overlook because there's so many great performances in this movie. So I just had to shout that out.
This movie is jam packed. Like it's an all star team of actors, particularly black actors from that time period. And I think that when you look at this story, it's Malcolm kind of searching for that father figure. His first father figure is West Indian Archie. Then it becomes Elijah Muhammad, and he falls out with both of those figures for different reasons. But as you said, Delroy Lindo, the portrayal of at the beginning of the movie when we first meet him, he's like this boss that you just power just exudes from him.
Mm-hmm.
And then to see where he is at the end of his life, the realization when Malcolm looks at him, this figure that he both admired and feared has become, it's a very powerful scene. And Delroy Lindo is such an underrated actor.
Malcolm X, such a strong character. There's such a specific story to tell, but so much of his character is defined by the relationships he has with these various characters, whether it's West Indian Archie, whether it's Shorty, Angela Bassett's character who plays the love interest in the movie, because she has the unfortunate burden of having to react to his death.
Yeah, so I'll get to Denzel in a second, Al,
Okay,
but
yes,
first, because I could talk about Denzel's performance all day, but real quick, I want to give a shout out to Angela Bassett as Betty Shabazz, Malcolm X's widow, and wife and then widow. Just the power that she has on screen, and granted, she doesn't get as much time on screen as Denzel, as Malcolm X, but the scenes they share together, particularly like there's one towards the end of the movie where they're having an argument, and it's right before Malcolm realizes what the Nation of Islam and Elijah Muhammad are really doing, and how Elijah Muhammad has had all of these children with these young women that are part of the nation, and she's trying to get him to see the truth, and they have this big fight, and just the power between both of them, and like Angela Bassett has been great forever, and will continue to be great. But I think her and Denzel going toe to toe, that was a perfect match. And I also want to give a shout out to Spike Lee, because I'm always a bit leery, Al, when directors cast themselves in their own movies.
Yes.
But I feel like Spike knew just the right amount of Spike Lee to put in this Spike Lee joint. But I think he's really great as Malcolm's running buddy at the beginning of the movie. And then we see later when Malcolm joins the nation, Shorty meets up with him again and even attends one of Malcolm's services. I like the maturation of Malcolm in contrast with Shorty, who is still trying to hang on to that street life. Denzel Washington has had many great roles. Denzel Washington, as I said, has been one of the best actors of his generation since I was in high school, which for those doing math at home, it has been a while. When he steps into these shoes of Malcolm X as a historical figure, he just embodies the role. Like, I don't feel like I'm watching Denzel Washington. I feel like somebody got some footage and they colorized it, and I'm watching Malcolm X give his speeches, and the way that he plays not only the high flying moments, the high spots, to use wrestling terminology, when he's out doing these big speeches, you've been hoodwinked, bamboozled, led astray, run amok. We didn't land on Plymouth Rock landed on us. When he's going through all of the big moments of Malcolm X speeches, by any means necessary, but we also get the quiet moments.
That's right.
Where Malcolm goes to meet with the young women that have been hurt by Elijah Muhammad. They're like, we thought Elijah Muhammad and the Nation of Islam would care for us and watch after these children. And he's like, Allah will look after us. Allah will look after us all. And the moment where Earl, his head of security, is angry because he feels like Malcolm's not taking enough precautions, and they're on the phone, and then Earl's just like, peace be unto you, brother Malcolm, as he's getting ready to hang up, and Denzel as Malcolm is like, no, that is peace be unto you, Earl. The famous Spike Lee double dolly shot that we get at the end of the movie that's set to the sounds of Sam Cooke's "A Change Gonna Come" when Malcolm is heading to his final speech before he is gunned down. The peace and resolve and calm that Denzel is able to convey just through his facial acting. I think it's easily one of the best performances in a biographical film that I've ever seen. And he deserved all of the awards. No shade to Al Pacino, but Denzel was robbed, Al. I don't want to speak ill of your namesake, but Denzel deserved that Oscar, not Al Pacino for Son of a Woman. I said it.
Hoo-ah! Tell him. There aren't too many famous Als that I can lean on, but you could not be more correct. And look, I can't imagine as a performer, as a director, both having to try to pull that out of a performer, but also trying how unbelievably satisfying it must have been when Spike's watching the dailies to just see Denzel knocking it out of the park time and time again. You mentioned it already. We could go on and on and on about characters and performances. So Nate, I think I know what you're going to give it, but I got to get one out of you. A score, 1 out of 10. What do you give it?
Yeah, this one was easy. Absolutely. If Denzel were the only good actor in this entire film, right, it would still be a 10 because his performance was that great. But then when you add in Delroy Lindo, when you add in Spike Lee, when you add in Angela Bassett, when you add in like so many of the others, like the gentleman that played Elijah Muhammad, like I think he was excellent in his role. And it was a complex portrayal of Elijah Muhammad, who starts as this father figure for Malcolm X. And then we see the jealousy, and he feels like Malcolm's, getting too big for his britches. Brother Baines, who comes to Malcolm in jail and is the one that kind of sets him on the right path. The scene where they're reading the dictionary together. It's still one of my favorites in this film. So like this film is loaded top to bottom, like even in small roles. There are so many great performances in this film, so it's easily a 10 for me.
I totally agree with you there. And we're talking about visual storytelling, and I'm glad you brought up that scene where they're looking at the dictionary, they're reading the dictionary, because so much of the power of Malcolm X as a man is his ability to weaponize language, his ability to sort of not only present and sort of represent this idea of how powerful a well-spoken individual can be, but the idea of even recognizing this isn't our language, but we can still master it and we can still use this to prevail.
I think it's excellent. I think it holds up. Spike Lee, you mentioned he's an auteur. He can be hit or miss when he kind of leans into his wants and desires for these Spike Lee joints. I happen to think he hits more often than he misses, but when he misses, I feel like he really misses. See Chirac, for an example. With Malcolm X, I think it just, much like with Denzel, with his performance, he knocked it out of the park every time. I feel like for the most part, Spike was firing on all cylinders. Actually, let's talk about the opening shot of the film, where it starts with the footage of the beating of Rodney King. And that just kind of puts you into the scene of, this movie is not just talking about this historical figure, Malcolm X. It's talking about what we can learn from the life of Malcolm X and apply it to today. When you see the American flag being burnt into the form of an X, when you go from a shot, when we see Malcolm on the street for the first time in Harlem, we start on this big, bright skyline with the picture of the Coca-Cola advertisement, and a train goes by, and then we go beneath the train tracks into the street, and it's a little less bright. It's a little less sunny. It's dark, and people are doing what they got to do to survive in this environment. The scene on the train where, Malcolm is doing his best to appease these white customers, and we get the little brief glimpse of what Malcolm really wants to do, and smash this ham and cheese sandwich in this patronizing, annoying officer's face. We get, as you said, the double dolly shot, which is probably the most famous shot from this film. But one of the quiet shots in this movie that I really love is when Malcolm is doing one of his first big speeches for the Nation of Islam, and he's standing in front of this giant picture, this giant mural of Elijah Muhammad. And so, like, there's the wide shot where you see Elijah Muhammad just kind of looming over everything. But then when we go to the close-up shot, Al, you see Malcolm at the podium, and then you just see the two eyes
He's
of Elijah Muhammad
right between them. Yep.
Yes. And it just kind of like that foreshadowing that, yes, Elijah Muhammad is glad that you're bringing new life into this nation of Islam, but he's also watching you because he doesn't want your star to ascend past his star. And there's so many great little moments. I think both visually, but then with the soundtrack, again, A Change Gonna Come is a brilliant choice for a song for that final walk to the ballroom where Malcolm gives his final speech. Shotgun is used
Oh
to
yeah.
by Junior Walker and the All Stars, used to great effect. You know, I'm thinking back to the prison scenes where
Mhm.
Denzel is finally making that conversion to Islam. Oh, I almost forgot. Like one of the things that Spike had to fight for was shooting on location.
Oh sure, of course.
And when we get that pilgrimage to Mecca at the end of the film, I think that is some of the most beautiful cinematography that I've seen Spike Lee do, where we just get these shots of Malcolm X kind of stepping into his fully realized
Oh
final form, if you will,
yeah.
and just the way Spike gets these great shots in Mecca. So yeah, I think he did a great job with this. Probably his best work from a visual standpoint as a director.
Great cinema brings something new to the conversation, but also echoes in many ways everything that came before it. And there's just all these moments where I'm watching this brilliant filmmaker do things that seems like, and maybe it's not, I might be interpreting it incorrectly, but where he is sort of playing with the history of cinema. You talk about the American flag at the beginning. I'm immediately thinking of the movie Patton. There's a film, The Lower Depths, which has been made many times. Truffaut made a version, Kurosawa made a version, and you talk about that descending from the skyline down beneath the tracks. This is a visual trope that's used in both movies to sort of start in this beautiful sort of higher structure and then comes down, and those are movies about class, and so we see that here. As I continue forward, I made this connection. I'm curious if you did. When I saw the footage at the beginning, it reminded me of Ryan Coogler's Fruitvale Station, and
Mhm.
that movie very similarly does the same thing, which starts with footage, obviously very different movies in terms of how the footage impacts the story, but I dare anybody to watch Fruitvale Station and not feel 100 emotions within the first 60 seconds because of the footage you watch. And I would like to think maybe that's a nod, or Coogler uh, growing up in a world where he was watching films like Malcolm X. So I just want to kind of connect what I saw, and like I said, a lot of waves and echoes of cinema history, but also link that will forever be a part of cinema. I think Malcolm X is, and a strong, important link.
I would again another strong score for Spike Lee here, and again I think to your point, Coogler obviously is probably influenced by Spike as he was for a long time. Really, not that there weren't other black directors before him or that were his contemporaries. I'm thinking primarily of somebody like a Melvin Van Peebles, who had
Yeah.
a big effect on black cinema, but was kind of lost to history for a while. But Spike was kind of our only guy that we had in the arena, and so yeah, it wouldn't shock me if that was a direct influence on him. I'm going to go ahead and give it a 9 out of 10.
Visual storytelling, we're locking in a 9 out of 10. That brings us to use of sound. You mentioned Sam Cooke earlier. The context of that song being played, unfortunately, as he is walking to sort of his final, I want to say speech, but he doesn't even really get to give the speech.
Obviously, you have to start with that "A Change Gonna Come" scene where we get not just Malcolm going forward to that final moment, but you see Betty and the girls, that are getting ready to go to this ballroom. You see the group of assassins that are getting ready to go as well, and it's kind of paralleling these three tracks where Malcolm, Betty Shabazz, and the kids, and then the assassins are all headed to the same point for this final meetup, and we get just some really poignant moments is I think the word that I would use, Al, where we were in the ballroom and one of Malcolm's daughters drops her doll on the floor. Giancarlo Esposito
That's right.
just picks up the doll and just like, hey, I think you dropped this, my beautiful sister. And just Betty, like, what do you say to the nice man? And she's like, thank you. "Oh, it's my pleasure, my beautiful queen." And then as soon as Betty and the kids walk away, you just see that fake smile drop from Esposito's face. And it's just like, the foreshadowing. And then when we get after the double dolly shot, Malcolm is stopped on the street by a woman who recognizes him, an older black lady, and she's just like, I don't care what those people say about you. You're gonna be all right. Don't worry, Jesus will protect you. And again, we see the smile that Malcolm has, like, okay, yeah, everything's gonna be all right. I believe you. And then she says, Jesus will protect you. And then we get kind of this far off look, like Malcolm's just like, okay.
It is one of maybe the darkest jokes. I don't even know if it's comfortable to call it. It got a laugh out of me when I was watching it, but it is so smart and well done. Yeah, but subtle, very subtle.
Yeah. Going back to the beginning of the film, where we see Shorty and Malcolm going out for a night on the town, where they're both in these bright zoot suits and they're both doing the crazy walk, the kind of the music of the time period that just fit when they're at the club and they're dancing. The scene after Malcolm's been working on the train and they listen to the Joe Louis fight. Joe Louis wins the fight, and so he takes the first stop and gets off in Harlem, and just the party that is going on in Harlem to welcome Joe Louis back to New York. Spike Lee is always somebody who is cognizant of what music can do to enhance a film. I feel like Spike knows what he's doing. He doesn't overdo it, though, because I feel like there would be a temptation to overdo it, particularly with the music of the time period, which I know Spike is a fan of. There is restraint shown in this film that we usually don't get.
Coming off the 9 for visual storytelling. Use of sound.
This is Spike Lee. I know, like, Jordan is one of his favorite athletes, and this is Jordan's flu game for Spike Lee when it comes to directing. It's the most indelible and the most iconic thing that he has ever done, in my opinion. The final song we hear in the film is Someday We'll All Be Free. And I like that song, but I don't know, like, I get why that song is in the film, but I don't know if that's the mood I should be feeling after this film. And again, maybe that has more to do with me, Al, than what Spike was trying to say. Because I feel like after watching this, I feel angry.
Yeah.
At history. I feel angry at history, Al.
Yeah.
I want to fight history. And so, like, I feel like maybe something more militant would have been appropriate for me personally.
Sure.
But I get why, coming off of the eulogy by Ossie Davis and the scene with Nelson Mandela, that, we kind of want to end on this hopeful, positive note. But that's the only thing that I kind of bump up against from time to time with this film. So again, this is another strong grade for me. It's a 9 out of 10.
Locking in the 9. When they cut to Nelson Mandela, what I think happens, and it happens earlier in the movie with Reverend Al Sharpton, you see that there is a community, a powerful community making this movie, and even just in a moment and at the end, it does feel like something way bigger than just a film. And I think that's really special and really difficult for any movie to capture. But let's get into theme a little bit, because not only wraps us up here, but that does encapsulate a lot of kind of what we're already talking about when we're talking about the end of the movie. And, for those unfamiliar, we end in a classroom and there's all these young children looking right into camera, which again is a very Spike Lee move. And they're all saying, I am Malcolm X. And I'm even getting goosebumps as I talk about it, because it is, look, it's on the nose. I mean, let's face it, I wouldn't go so far as to call it clever, but it is extremely powerful. And there's so much finesse and nuance throughout the previous 3 hours and 20 minutes. When you get to that last 2, I don't care. I think you can be on the nose. And because the themes at that point are just sort of bubbling at the seams.
Yeah, real quick, I'll piggyback off of what you said, or lion back, as it were, Al.
Thank you.
I don't want to diminish your community. But I feel like that's probably why I bumped up against it. I think the first time I saw the film, I'm looking at this from the perspective of somebody that kind of knows the deal. For a lot of people, though, this is kind of their first introduction to Malcolm X, or their first real deep dive. I think the first time I saw it, I was just kind of like, that feels forced. It feels corny, Spike. But then when I've watched it, I think there are times where I've absolutely loved it. It depends on when you watch the film. But I do love, again, the eulogy from Ossie Davis leading into the 2 classrooms, the one in America in Harlem, and then the one in South Africa with Nelson Mandela, who had not yet become the president of South Africa.
Right.
And he's speaking to these kids, and he's, in the words of Brother Malcolm. And then I do like that Spike gives Malcolm X the last word in the Malcolm X movie, where we cut from right before uh, Nelson says, by any means necessary, to archival footage of Malcolm X, and he's like, by any means necessary, and then we go to the credits. The theme of this film, I think I can sum that up more succinctly than I did my feelings about the last 2 minutes of Malcolm X. The theme of this film, to me, Al, is growth. It's growth, and we see that with Malcolm X. Again, 3 very distinct portions of this man's life. Like most people, when they get something new in their life, whether it's a new religion or a new girlfriend or a new job or a new hobby, he goes 110% into that. He is the most Islam in the building. He is the most Nation of Islam person you will ever see. This has nothing to do. Well, it does have something to do with the movie because it's a thought I have every time I see the Mecca scene, but it has more to do with history, and I think that's why the ending kind of always has this discordant feeling for me, Al, because it's like we lost Martin Luther King and Malcolm X within short order. Malcolm X is kind of coming more towards the point of we don't need black separation. We don't need black isolation. We can all work together, but there are some things you got to fix, America, in order for that to be achieved. And then we've got Martin Luther King at the same time, who is like, obviously, he's nonviolent. He's the peaceful guy. He's the guy that America is able to tolerate. He's palatable. But Martin at this time is also like, you know what? Sometimes you got to give somebody the carrot and the stick. Sometimes you can only turn the other cheek for so long.
Right.
And so we see Martin start to become a little bit more militant, quote unquote.
Sure.
And it's like, man, the trajectory of these two men's lives, that they were getting ready to kind of converge and arrive at the same ideal. If both men had lived, in the history of this country, particularly when it comes to race relations, is dramatically changed, is dramatically altered. And so I think that's what gets me angry, Al. It's just like, and again, this has nothing to do with you, Spike Lee. This has nothing to do with the movie, but it's like that. I think there are certain points in history where things could fundamentally change if one outcome happens versus another. And I feel like if Malcolm X and Martin Luther King survive into the 70s, America looks a lot different today than it currently does.
I totally agree with you. And I selfishly I'm hoping Spike Lee is listening. And Spike, what I want you to do is I want you to take a play out of Tarantino's playbook and just do a revisionist history movie. And I want to see Spike Lee doing Malcolm X and MLK. They both live, and I want to see what that looks like.
Yes. And here's the thing. I've given this movie a 10. I've given this movie a couple 9s. So, people can do math out there, but it doesn't matter. Sometimes you have to override math with feelings and with heart and the truth of your emotions, Al. And the truth of the matter is, whenever I watch this film, even if there are some things that I personally think could have been done better or could have been eliminated from this film, this film is a 10 for me all day. Like, it's 3 hours long, but doesn't feel like it's 3 hours. It never really drags. For anybody in the audience that has not seen Malcolm X, you owe it to yourself. If you are interested in history, if you're interested in Denzel Washington, if you're just interested in the art of making a film, Warner Brothers gave Spike Lee an ultimatum. Like, this can't be 3 hours. And they're like, what do you think this is? Endgame, even though Endgame won't happen for another 15, 20 years. Right. What do you think this is? And Spike is like, no, this has to be the length that it is. So the funding was pulled. Members of his crew were fired, and he had to go hat in hand to people like Prince and Michael Jackson and Oprah and Bill Cosby, and we'll leave that there, and Magic Johnson to get funding for this thing, and Janet Jackson. Yes, this is bigger than just this story, even though the story's pretty big. This is about the Black community over the years, and it was true on and off screen, because Spike wouldn't have been able to get this done if folks hadn't have reached out with no promise of anything coming back to them. Like, no promise of, hey, I got points on the back end, or hey, you'll get a cut of the merch. It's just like, hey, I need to make this movie about Malcolm X starring Denzel. Can you help me? And they did, and we had a wonderful film because of it. So you get probably the most in-depth look at this figure that is loved by some, hated by others, and misunderstood by most in Malcolm X. And so, yeah, this is a 10 all day for me.
We've got all the scores locked in now, Nate, so I can do the big reveal. You gave the plot a 9, the characters and performances a 10, the visual storytelling the 9, the use of sound a 9, and the theme a 10. So that's a 94 out of 100. I'm safe to say that's an A plus. I mean, I don't think you. I would hope Spike isn't offended by that if he's listening. I gave just a little off from you. The plot I gave a 9.5 to your 9. I did give the characters and performances a 10 because I don't think anyone couldn't. I don't know how you could not give this movie a 10. Visual storytelling, I did give a 10 to your 9. It did just enough for me. I felt like use of sound, I also did give a 10, just sort of the same thing when we talk about the canon of Spike Lee. I think this is a really great example of how an auteur can adapt to a very real life biographical story. And then for theme, you and I, again, we landed in the same place. I gave it a 10. So it was a 99 for me, to your 94, both A pluses, pretty solid average there that, again, I would hope Mr. Lee could be happy with.
Absolutely, Al. You know, I was now I can pull back the curtain because I was asked to come on this podcast and talk to a lion, and I didn't know how this was going to work, Al. You know, I'll try anything once when it comes to podcasting, but I was like, does a lion even know how to operate the microphones? Does a lion even know? Do lions have opposable thumbs? Is this going to work from a technical standpoint? These are all questions that were swirling in my mind, Al, before we started talking this evening. Yes, obviously, to answer your question, Al, we can do this again sometime.
Well, I love it. I thank you for making the journey. I know it is a little bit of a trek. And for anybody who hasn't checked out Malcolm X, like Nate so eloquently put it, you should. But if you have not checked out the Nefarious Media Network, you should also check that out because they've got tons of great stuff going on. They are on the Instagram, they're on social media, they're also on Patreon, they're here on YouTube as well. Everything is linked in the description, so make sure that you go and you check them out. Give them a follow. You can hear a lot more of Nate.
Thank you so much, Al. I appreciate it, man. Everybody supporting the Nefarious Media Network because we're changing the game by any means necessary. And listen to Al because you know what? He may be a lion, but when it comes to his thoughts about movies, y'all, he's not lying.
Thanks for listening, and here's a look at the scoreboard from our show. Jimmy gave She's Gotta Have It an 86 and a C+, to my 91 an A with an average of 77.5 and a B+. Lara Benario scored Do the Right Thing a 93 and an A- to my 98 and A+, with an average of 95.5 and an A. And Malcolm X scored the highest with 100% and an A+ from Timothy Richardson, a 94 and A+ from Nate Milton, and a 99 and another A+ from me with a 97.6 A+ average. I would love to know your scores, so please let me know what you gave each film in the comments. I want to thank my pal Jimmy the Toucan for flying in today, and you can network with Lara on LinkedIn by following the link in our description. Support the Nefarious Network and its founder, Nate Milton, by subscribing to their YouTube channel, which is also linked in the description. Thank you to Full Sail's Timothy Richardson for stopping by as well. Join me next time on episode 5, Big Toy Movies. Lego lover and post-wrestling's Wei Ting will review the Lego movie, Sid the Cinema Sloth returns to score Transformers, and one of my best friends, horticultural historian Jennifer Tyson, grades Barbie. Thanks to the team at Real Digital for producing this episode and Platinum Plastic, who supplies our show's merchandise on redbubble.com. If you haven't left a like by now, you're running out of time, so subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon to be notified when Real Talk drops twice a week. Thanks for listening, and if you're going to talk movies, make sure it's Real Talk.
Doctor?
Come on, what?
Always do the right thing.
This review is brought to you by Post Wrestling, your trusted destination for pro wrestling podcasts, breaking news, and honest reviews on everything WWE, AEW, and beyond. Want to stay in the loop? Just search Post Wrestling on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts and hit subscribe.